climbing the walls, nails down the boards.
To me, the Tata Curvv is no longer a car, it is a friend, because I'm not even making this up. I feel like I've met this car more times than I have my own family. Should give you a good idea of how well the personal life is going, especially during this launch season. But I've met the Tata Curvv as the EV original concept. I've met it as the ICE concept at the Delhi Auto Expo. I've met it as the pre-production concept car at the Bharat Mobility Show. I've met it as a clay model at their design studio in Coventry. I've met both the EV and ICE versions at their launches. I've met the Curvv EV at their drive in Udaipur. And as you do with any good friend in your life, you successfully finally make that Goa plan like we have right now with the Curvv ICE. Now, as any good friend does, I am going to be extremely vocal about the bits that I like and I find dear about the Curvv ICE. But as a great friend does, I'm also going to give the harsh reality checks where necessary. I'm actually going to start off with what this car is like to drive, and to begin with, the steering. It has this weird thing of, I don't know, it feels like it has excessive slack, especially when you're at a standstill. How easily I'm able to flick it from one side to the other without being like a progressive movement like you traditionally expect. It's something that's a little bit weird. Doesn't really become an issue when you're on the move, but something that feels definitely unusual at a standstill. Now, the reason why I'm starting off with the drive bit is because there are some important changes with this car, and that is one, besides the Revertron petrol that we've seen in other Tata cars, including the Nexon, you now have the 1.23 cylinder GDI Hyperion turbo petrol engine, and you have the diesel DCA, which is a sophisticated bit of tech that's being introduced in this segment. The versions that we have on test today are the Hyperion GDI petrol with a manual transmission 6-speed and the diesel DCA as well. I'm starting off with this. Now, if you look at the overall options that you have in the mid-size SUV space, this is sitting somewhere in between the naturally aspirated options that you generally have and the turbo petrols that you see in these segments. So it's making about 125 horsepower, 225 Newton meters of torque. So it's not a massive jump up compared to what you have in the Revertron petrol. But from an experiential standpoint, Tata's done a great job with this engine. So yes, you can tell it's a 3-cylinder engine at idle. It does have that little bit of thrumminess. But once you get going and you're driving around in the city or on the highway, the engine is smooth enough, vibes are well controlled. And importantly, what this engine and transmission combination, specifically with the manual at least, gives you is great drivability. So even if you're driving in stop and go traffic, it's not like you're going to encounter much of any lag, and you can keep up with city traffic quite easily. It doesn't feel like hesitant when you're looking at high gear, low speed combinations. So driving in like 4th gear at 40 kilometers per hour, the engine keeps pulling along nice and gentle. The fueling is smooth enough. It doesn't feel hesitant. It doesn't feel jerky. So for everyday use, this engine is sitting exactly where you'd expect it to sit when it comes to what you see on paper. So it's doing a little bit extra compared to the naturally aspirated 1.5s that you generally have in the segment, wherein you're getting that added bit of excitement where you can give a little bit more confidence while you're making overtakes. You're not having to push the engine as hard when you're going for high speed overtakes, for example. But at the same time, when you go for outright pushing it, it's not going to feel as exciting or as enthusiast friendly as something like the 1.5 TSI that you get with the Skoda VWs, or even the 1.5 turbos that you have in the Creta and Seltos. So it's that healthy middle ground where it's doing everything just right. Although one thing I'm curious about is, what is this thing going to be like with the 7-speed DCT? Because this particular engine is what you get in the top variants of the Curvv Petrol. And in that case, when you're spending that kind of money, we're talking north of 20 lakh rupees, the likelihood is most people would have been choosing the twin clutch automatic and not the manual. So I'm curious to see if that transmission is going to be complementing the great behavior of this engine itself, or is it something that's going to feel like it's sapping power and not quite doing justice to what this engine's capabilities are. But yeah, otherwise, I am quite happy with this manual. In fact, had they given a similar combination with the experience with the Nexon segment, the sub 4 meter SUVs, this thing would have generally been one of the most remarkable options in that space. Some food for thought. That aside, if you're talking about the everyday bits, the steering is light enough. Like I mentioned, it does have that weird slack when it comes to absolutely slow speeds or when you're at a standstill, but the clutch is light enough, the throw is not too long, the gear shifts are also smooth enough. They're a little bit long, but definitely not something that's going to make everyday use a tricky bit whatsoever. In fact, this manual transmission with the petrol is a engine and transmission combination I'd be very happy to live with. Now, the other powertrain combination that we've experienced on this drive, and arguably the one that's going to invite a lot more curiosity, is the diesel DCA, because it is a segment first technology. And if you look at the space overall, it's not like we have a lot of models to compare this with anymore. It's just the Creta and the Seltos diesels that we have. And in that sense, if I had to give you a summation of what this powertrain combination is like, I'd say that it's a lovely transmission, not quite being matched by a great enough engine. What I mean by that is, with the diesel, you can tell that it's a diesel a little bit too apparently. Now, granted, the other diesels that you have in the space are also not all that refined, but the vibrations in this are a little bit more apparent. The noise levels that you experience, especially when you're at idle, when you fire up the engine, it's a little bit apparent. You can feel the vibrations coming through the floorboard, and it's missing that bit of spit and polish that you expect, especially when you're going to be spending like 20 to 23 lakh rupees on a car. But otherwise, from a drivability standpoint, it is an diesel, meaning it does everything right. You want to amble about in the city, done. It will give you all the pull that you need. You want to cruise on the highway, done. It will feel nice and relaxed, especially once you get into overdrive. You want to make overtakes, especially if you have like a passenger load on board. It's not a super laggy engine, and when the turbo does kick in, it's a very nice and gentle curve. So it gets the job done perfectly fine. With the DCA, the transmission is definitely giving you a great deal of smoothness. So especially when you're driving at a steady pace, shifts are notably smoother than what you get in the torque converters that you otherwise have in this segment. So yeah, there is that level of sophistication that you are getting with the transmission. But again, when you're driving in regular conditions, you would have wanted the engine itself to be little less vibey, little less noisy, and a little bit more responsive as well. One point to note though, and this is something that I had experienced even with the DCA in the Nexon Petrol, the paddle shifters are there in place to give you that added level of manual control. Frankly speaking, you're not really ever going to need it. But there is that one thing that when you're switching to manual mode briefly for an overtake or something, you can't press and hold the paddle shifter to get you back into drive. You have to lose the transmission itself to get you back into that mode. And that's traditionally something that you do see across the space when you're looking at any of the other automatics available in the segment that are offered with paddle shifters. As for the ride and handling, we haven't really tested out the handling much. By what little we have experienced, it's on point, definitely not something built for the enthusiast, but we weren't expecting that in the first place. And the ride is the way Arun has described it, and I think it's quite accurate. It's very similar to the Nexon, meaning that it's giving you great bump absorption, feels nice and planted on the highway. Sharp bumps are not going to feel like a whack inside the cabin. Insulation is quite good, but it is set up slightly on the firmer side. Definitely a more compliant suspension setup than what we had seen with the Curvv EV, because this is a lighter car by virtue of not having a giant battery pack in between the wheels. But I think it's impressive that they've managed to deliver this complete ride package, given that it's running on 18-inch alloy wheels. It does feel very compliant, especially when you factor in the wheel size that this thing is using. Just a quick note on ADAS. Now, specific to the cars that we have on the media drive, Tata has actually deactivated adaptive cruise control and cruise control on the cars that have it equipped. So customer cars are going to have it, but unfortunately for this drive in particular, it's not active, so no assessment I can give you on that. Besides that, a couple of ADAS features that I have experienced, and they're similar to what we had seen even with the Curvv EV, meaning lane assist works fine, but it is definitely an assistance system outright, meaning that when the roads have sharp bends or a very distinctive turn, at that point lane assist is not really going to be able to keep you within the lane. It's just going to be like, I'm giving input, and then it'll just cut off outright. So definitely something that's coming in as a fail-safe more so than something that's going to be an everyday assistance system, at least on roads that are going to be including a lot of sharp bends and curves. Besides that, collision assistance did actually come in at one point, and came in somewhere where I wasn't expecting. And this is typical of a lot of cars that we've experienced, wherein you don't expect the car to intervene. And what I mean by intervention is, it's going to give you a light bit of a braking input whenever it's detecting the possibility of a collision. But I was just making a regular overtake. It was at a speed that you regularly manage on highways in India. But the system just felt like it had to intervene. So just a little bit of a so those are the kind of behavioral patterns that can get a little bit tricky to understand, and it's similar in that sense to a lot of other ADAS that we've seen, wherein you're fine if you're using it in open highways where you don't have a lot of traffic, so you can maintain larger gaps. You don't have to worry about somebody coming in between, forcing the car to brake and slow down. But when you're driving it in city conditions, this can become an issue at times, and I can see a lot of people choosing to switch it off, and it frankly has to do a lot with the fact that our traffic conditions are just too erratic for any ADAS setup to be perfectly tuned for them.
Safety features include 6 airbags, ABS with EBD, ISOFIX, front and rear parking sensors, a high-resolution surround view camera, hill hold and tire pressure displays, among others.
Sitting in the front seat, the first thing that I have to mention from an experiential standpoint though, as someone who has experienced the Curvv EV, the difference it makes to not have that battery pack intruding into the cabin, it's significant. I'm able to sit a lot more comfortably in the Curvv ICE than I would be in the Curvv EV because my driving position isn't sort of being sandwiched between the roof and the floor line itself. That being said, for tall people and the overall cabin experience in general, for better or for worse, it is like the Nexon itself. And that does include some of the ergonomic oddities that come with that. So someone who is somewhere around, let's say 6 feet tall, basically on the taller side, you'd find that you're sitting further back than you'd actually deem necessary, which is still kind of okay. You can adapt to that. But the problem is the steering itself doesn't have reach adjustment. This makes such a huge difference if you just offered that. But yeah, if you're of an average height up to about 6 feet tall, you'll find that the seats are comfortable, quite accommodating. The seat support is good. Seat cushioning is on point. You have enough headroom. I'd say your sort of top line, the cutoff is 6 feet. Exactly at 6 feet or under, this is going to be a great place to be in. But along those lines of the same ergonomic oddities, you have similar sort of issues that we've seen with the Nexon as well. So like the Type A and Type C USB charger or the 12-volt socket, the actual area to reach this is kind of awkward. Placing your cables can be a little bit tricky, but yeah, of course, once you've placed those cables in there, they're pretty much going to stay there for their entire life. And the door pockets as well, you have to place your bottles sort of backward, so that can be a little bit awkward to reach and access your bottles or any items that you place into the door pads themselves. That also extends into some of the features that you use inside the cabin, like the seat ventilation. There's no control over here, even though you have a lot of real estate to play with. The seat controls are on the seats themselves, so you don't have any corresponding display, and you kind of figure out, okay, is it on? What level is it at? So yeah, something that could have been paid more attention to, and that in my books also extends into the interior fit finish quality. It is pretty much the same as the Nexon in terms of touch and feel. So it's not super premium per se. It does look really good. The combination of patterns and colors that they've gone for the cabin design, absolutely spot on. But it feels like there was a little bit more room for improvement in terms of the materials that they've used. Just the grainings, honestly, not even the plastic, just the graining of the plastic, that would have made a world of difference into making this cabin feel a lot more premium. But the design itself, while similar to the Nexon, especially the dashboard itself, is appreciable. It is a nice place to be in. It's a great place to, sit inside your car and just feel like you're in your sort of zone. And that's also complemented by the steering that's been derived from larger Tatas like the Safari. And then we come to my absolute favorite bit of the Tata Curvv, the features package. 6-way power adjustable driver's seat, a co-driver's seat that besides slide adjustment also has height adjustment. You have a wireless phone charger, and placing larger phones, especially large phones with large cases, can be a little bit tricky with this particular charging pad. You have drive mode, city, sport and eco, and yes, if you have the option, you can switch off the city drive mode activated, sport drive mode activated. You don't have to listen to that lady saying that every single time. But besides all that, and of course the exactly what you want on a hot day. A large panoramic sunroof that's absolutely going to put no filter between you and this merciless sun. You also have the 12.3-inch touchscreen infotainment system that comes with both wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. It's a system that we've seen in previous models like the Tata Nexon, even the Harrier and Safari. And over the years, they've added a little bit of spit and polish to make sure that operationally this touchscreen is as smooth as possible, and frankly speaking, it's one of my absolute favorite infotainment systems. It's assisted by a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster. It has multi-views. The instrument cluster can also be used to display your navigation feed. So if you're running Android Auto, you can see Google Maps here. If you're using Apple Maps, you can see the Apple Maps feed here. But on Apple CarPlay, you can't see the Google Maps feed displayed over here. It's something about the proprietary software. And in addition to that, like we've seen with the Curvv EV, the blind view monitor function that you had with the surround view camera, that feed has also been fitted into the digital instrument cluster itself. So it's a little bit more usable than seeing the entire touchscreen display being cordoned off just for that camera display as and when you use the indicator. And my absolute favorite bit of the tech package has to be the sound system. Listening to podcasts, rock music, smooth jazz, classical Indian. Frankly speaking, there is no parallel. This is easily the best music system in the entire segment. And as long as all of these features function as intended, no glitches, no issues, no niggles, you're going to love it. In the back seat of the Tata Curvv Ice, and I have of course employed the services of Arun, who is
roughly 6 feet.
5'11". He has set the driver's seat as per his height, and take a look at the kind of space he has. So the rear seat of the Curvv, if I had to give you a summary, is it is Goldilocks at the third bowl of porridge if you are up to 6 feet tall or under that. Meaning you're getting great overall cabin support. The seats are very comfortable. Cushioning is on point. You've got about, I'd say, a fist's worth of knee room left for under 6-footer behind his own driving position. Headroom is also just about enough for somebody who's at that height. It's as soon as you cross that threshold of 6 feet in height, that is where you start feeling the sort of drawbacks when it comes to the available cabin space. And yes, like we saw in the front seat, it does feel very similar to the Nexon in that sense, because the Nexon is in itself a great family car to begin with. If we're talking about amenities, you do have a Type A and Type C USB charger at the rear. There are no seat back pockets, but you do have a fold-out type armrest with space for 2 cups or cans in the middle. Overall, a great back seat experience for people of an average height. Is just missing that element of giving you that extra sense of sitting in a larger car that you expect when you're shifting from a sub 4 meter SUV to a 4.3. Okay, let me try and get this in the first shot so I look super cool. Karate kick. See? I totally knew how to do that. Now, like we'd seen with the Curvv EV as well, the power tailgate operation, it's a little bit more delayed than I would have liked. So it's like a Pink Floyd song where you're not quite sure if it's started yet or not. But yeah, once it gets up, nice and wide opening, you have about 500 liters of usable boot space. What that translates into in application speak is 2 large suitcases, maybe 2 to 3 medium-sized bags, or soft bags with 2 medium bags, that combination. Long story short, weekend road trips, airport runs is something that you're easily going to be able to manage with this car. The spare tire is placed underneath. You do have a boot light. And yes, the rear seats do split 60-40 if you need that additional bit of storage as well. Down. Now, the most important bit, the pièce de résistance of the Curvv's design is its curve. Towards the rear, you have that nice and gentle swoop, and like we've seen with the Curvv EV as well, if this thing had just about 100 or so millimeters to play about with, that curved design would have translated or just been amplified so much better. If you're talking about design highlights, you do have these connected LED taillights at the rear, including the dynamic turn indicators. You have the Tata logo in the middle, and it comes together beautifully. It looks like a very balanced bit of design. You have the sharply raked rear windscreen, and you have this spoiler effect that's been integrated on the roof that definitely lends it that Desi Urus sort of vibe. And if I may say so, like we'd seen with the Curvv EV as well, and much like myself, this is a car that looks a lot better in person than it does in images.
No, you don't.
Rude. Now, let's look at the side profile. It's a very clean bit of design. It's something that I feel like once you start seeing more and more curves on the road, you're going to appreciate the design a lot more, because let's not forget, most coupe SUVs that we know, they're all much larger in size, like the BMW X6 or the X4, the Porsche Cayenne Coupe. So delivering the same kind of wow factor with this size to play with, not easy, but I feel like Tata's definitely done a great job on that front. Lower down, you'll spot these 215/55 R18 18-inch alloy wheels that fill up the wheel wells nicely, and definitely compared to the wheel design that you have with the Curvv EV, these look so much better. Another design highlight on the side profile are the flush fitting door handles that you have on all four sides. The request sensor is one that you'll only find on the driver's door. Now from a aesthetic standpoint, yes, this definitely does look quite good, but it doesn't have like a spring-loaded action. So even if the doors are unlocked, it's not like you can press it, it'll flip out and then you pull it on. And definitely it's not got the automatic action like you do see in the higher variants of cars like the XUV 700 that has the same feature. So it becomes sort of a two-step process, which sure you can get used to, but especially when the monsoons come around and this bit gets caked in a lot of dust, it's like you have to make an extra bit of contact that ideally you would have wanted to avoid. Then you have this large wing mirror with the LED indicator lights integrated into it, along with the surround view camera, side camera integrated up there. And up front, like we've seen with the concept car and something that we always knew, for better or for worse, it does look very Nexon. For better, of course, being that the Nexon, let's face it, is a very handsome car to begin with. So why would you want to mess around with that? But at the same time, when you've got a car where the design is such a distinctive element, the face looks a little bit too similar to the Nexon, and that's not all, as you've already seen. So you do have the connected LED DRL up front. This is something that's also going to come with the welcome and goodbye function. You have the dynamic turn indicators integrated up here. You have LED projector headlights, LED fog lights that also come with the cornering function. And unlike the Curvv EV, where you had the completely sealed off front end, you do have this gentleman with a handsome moustache and this black panel integrated here with these gold highlights that definitely look really good with this particular color and make the front end get that element of the Tata Safari. So overall, the Tata Curvv is a distinctive bit of design, and even if you found it polarizing online, trust me, when you see it in person, you're gonna love it. The Tata Curvv to me is a case of many USPs balanced out by some important missed opportunities as well. Let me put it this way. If you look at the rest of Tata's model range, the Tiago, the Tigor, the Punch, the Nexon, all of these cars, when electrified, they became the version to choose and by a long shot. But here, I feel like Tata's done a more balanced job, wherein the Curvv EV and the Curvv ICE are equally competent products. Here, you are getting a car that offers you a practical boot. It is riding quite comfortably. The tech package, while similar to the Nexon, is definitely something that's great even by this, the compact SUV space. And while the powertrains are not setting any new benchmarks per se, they're not going to have any issues in terms of daily usability or drivability. And in that sense, it is a package that makes a lot of sense. The problem, however, for the Curvv, and frankly speaking, this is possibly the biggest problem for the Tata Curvv, is that the Tata Nexon exists. And that is where the issue is, something that we've seen with the Curvv EV as well, wherein the cabin experience in terms of the sense of size, in terms of giving you the feeling that you're sitting in a bigger car, that's not really happening. And while in the case of the Curvv EV versus the Nexon EV, the price gap was smaller, here, because of the sub 4 meter rule coming into play, the price gap between the Nexon and the Curvv, the top end versions, in ex-showroom price is somewhere around 3 lakh rupees. And that's not being matched up by a significant enough increase in terms of giving you a better cabin experience. However, there is a strong chance that this doesn't quite matter to you. And I will say this, if you are a family of tall, large people, this is not a car that I would recommend all that easily. But if you're of an average height, average build, and possibly the rear seat experience or having the best rear seat experience is not something that's all that important to you, this is a car that possibly you're going to take a look at. It's going to be the reason why you got intrigued by the Curvv in the first place, and possibly it's going to seal the deal as well. In that case, I would say that the Tata Curvv is not only a great car to recommend, it's one that you'd be very happy to see parked in your spot as well.
But most importantly, all of this needs to be backed up with a consistent and niggle-free experience. Our petrol test car had glitches with the door locks. A display car's tailgate wouldn't unlock, and the diesel's DCT transmission threw up random warnings during our drive as well. While this could be something specific to the press cars, it's happened too often with Tata cars to not treat it as a pattern. If you're specifically looking to buy a new bit of tech like the diesel DCA, it might be worthwhile to wait out the first lot of cars. Fact remains, the Curvv is a car we'd still happily recommend. It just isn't one we can recommend with blind confidence.